My thumb hovered over a red button that said, "Cancel all reservations." Margaret was 3 feet away from me, purse clamped under her arm, mouth open with nothing coming out of it. Behind her, a hotel guest had stopped walking entirely to watch. Near the elevator, a staff member in a resort polo was suddenly very interested in his clipboard. "Chloe," Margaret's voice had gone soft, the kind of soft she used at church. "Think about what you're doing." I'd had 11 hours to think about it. I'd thought about nothing else since I woke up alone in a bed I'd paid for, in a house I'd apparently been erased from for exactly as long as it took to book a replacement. My thumb didn't move, not yet. "I want to tell you how I got here because if I just showed you the button, you wouldn't believe the woman holding it was the same woman who, 2 days earlier, had color-coded a packing list for her husband's surprise birthday trip. I'd been married to Mark for 6 years when he turned 35, and for at least 4 of those years, he'd been telling me the same thing on a loop. I wish I saw my parents more. They lived 3 states away in Ohio, and every visit got swallowed by some excuse. His mother's schedule, his father's back, a wedding, a funeral, a maybe next season. I used to believe distance was the obstacle. I know better now. So that year, I decided to fix it for him. I'm a planner by nature. I run logistics for a mid-sized medical supply distributor, and organizing complicated things for people I love is, unfortunately, one of my love languages. I booked 5 nights at an all-inclusive resort outside Fort Myers, Florida. Flights for 4, me, Mark, and his parents, a 2-bedroom suite, the premium meal package, the spa credit, the whole thing. Total cost, $640. Every charge went on my card. Every reservation had my name listed first as the primary guest. Margaret called me the week before we left. Her voice on the phone had a warmth I wasn't used to. "I can't wait to finally have you all to myself for a week," she said. "Bonding time, just us girls while the boys golf." I remember hanging up and telling my sister, Priya, that Margaret had never once used the word bonding with me in 6 years of marriage, and maybe this trip was going to change something. Priya, who has never once let me get away with optimism, said, "Or maybe she wants something." I laughed it off. "I should tell you now, because this matters later, that I have a documented reaction to valerian root. Not allergic in the hospital visit sense, but bad enough that a doctor once told me, in writing, in my own chart, to avoid it entirely. Sedation, disorientation, and once, in college, 12 hours of sleep I couldn't be woken from no matter how hard my roommate shook me. Mark knew this. I'd told him early in our relationship, the way you tell someone the important things when you're trying to build a life with them. I didn't think about it again until the night before the flight. I was still packing at 11 at night, running my checklist for the 4th time, passports, chargers, the folder with all the confirmation numbers I'd printed because Margaret didn't trust email. Mark came in holding a steaming mug. "I made you some chamomile tea, honey." He'd never made me tea in 6 years. He said once it was too many steps for something you just drink and toss. I laughed and told him so. "You've been running around all night," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed, watching me zip and unzip the same pocket. "Figured you'd be too wired to sleep before the early flight." I drank it. We talked about nothing. Gate numbers, what time to leave for the airport, whether I'd packed his good shoes. He seemed calm. Looking back, he seemed rehearsed calm, the kind of calm you practice in a mirror, but he was my husband. It didn't occur to me, not once, to smell a mug of tea like it was evidence. I zipped the suitcase. I climbed into bed. That's the last thing I remember before morning. I woke up to sunlight and a silence that felt wrong before I understood why. His side of the bed was cold, not messed up and left cold, made like nobody had slept there at all. One new message on my phone, sent 4 hours earlier. "Tried to wake you, but you were out cold. Couldn't miss the flight. Gave your ticket to mom's friend so it wouldn't go to waste. Hope you understand." I read it 4 times, the way you reread a word until it stops looking like a real word. I have never in my adult life slept through an alarm. Not once. Not hungover, not sick, not during finals week in college. I sat there with my thumb over the screen and felt something cold settle into my stomach before my brain had even caught up to why. The tea. I didn't call him. I didn't call Margaret. I opened the airline app with hands that weren't entirely steady, found the last seat on the next flight to Fort Myers, and paid $612 without letting myself think about it. Then I called Priya from the departure gate. "He gave my ticket away," I said. "Someone's using my seat. My name's still on the room." Priya was quiet for a second. Then, "Chloe, that's not a mistake. That's a plan." I didn't want to believe her. That's loop 1, if you're keeping track. The first strange detail, and the first time I told myself it had to be an accident, a miscommunication, a Margaret being Margaret moment that Mark had gotten swept up in. I told myself that on the entire flight down. By sunset, I was standing outside the suite I had paid for, knocking on my own door with a boarding pass still creased in my back pocket. A woman answered. Early 30s, sundress, sunburn across her collarbone in a way that told me she'd been poolside all day. Confused to see me. Not guilty. Genuinely confused, which told me something too, though I didn't understand what yet. "Can I help you?" "You must be my mother-in-law's friend," I said. Her eyes flicked past me toward the bathroom. "Husband?" Mark stepped into the doorway behind her. Whatever tan he'd built up over one day of Florida sun drained straight out of his face. "What are you doing here?" "I paid for this trip, Mark. Why wouldn't I be here?" The woman, Elena, I'd learn, took a step back like the floor had shifted under her. "What's going on?" Margaret's voice came around the corner before she did, already mid-sentence in the tone she uses when she thinks she's the only adult in a room full of children. children. Why are we standing in the doorway? She rounded the corner with her purse tucked under one arm, composed right up until the exact second she saw me. For 1 second, her whole face went slack, and I watched 30 years of practice poise forget its lines. Then it rebuilt itself, fast, into something calm and cold and faintly annoyed, like I was a delivery that had arrived at the wrong time. This is inappropriate, Chloe. We can discuss this privately. You're making a scene. No, I said. We're doing this right here. That's loop 2. The confrontation I told myself would resolve things. It didn't. It just handed me more evidence. Is this about the tea? I turned to Mark. The valerian in it? The herb you know I've had a bad reaction to before? He wouldn't look at me. He looked at his mother instead, which told me everything about the chain of command in that family before he said a single word. Mom said it would just help you sleep. You'd been so stressed. Mom said. I actually laughed, though nothing about it was funny. That's the second time today you've quoted her like a source citation. Do you run everything through her first? I turned to Elena, whose sunburned shoulders had gone stiff. Did Margaret tell you her son was separated? That the marriage was over? Elena's mouth opened and closed once before anything came out. She said you were long gone. She said you two had been split up for months, that Mark just hadn't taken the ring off yet because of some tax thing with the house. A tax thing with the house. I remember thinking, distantly, that Margaret was talented enough to build a lie with legal-sounding scaffolding. Show me your hand, I told Mark. He shoved it in his pocket, too slow. I'd already seen the wedding band, the one I'd picked out with him 9 years ago in a mall kiosk because we were young and broke and it was what we could afford. Mom said it was easier this way, he mumbled. Easier for who? Easier for her to erase me and set you up on my dime in a room I booked, on a card I'm still paying interest on? Elena grabbed her bag off the sofa behind her. I'm not part of this. She left without looking back at either of them, and I respected her for it more than I expected to. Margaret crossed her arms and exhaled, the exact sound of a woman deciding I was the inconvenience in her evening. I hope you're happy. You've ruined the whole night. I pulled out my phone and turned the screen toward her, the resort's reservation portal, her name and Mark sitting right there under confirmed guests, and my thumb already hovering over the red button. You have no idea what I'm about to ruin. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. That's where I started this story, and that's as far as the button got that night, because right then, hotel security arrived, drawn by the guest who'd stopped to watch and the staff member who'd stopped pretending not to notice, and asked all four of us to continue the conversation somewhere that wasn't a public hallway. I didn't cancel anything yet. I wanted to, but somewhere underneath the adrenaline, the planner in me, the same one who'd color-coded a packing list 2 weeks earlier, knew that canceling a resort reservation out of pure fury would feel incredible for 4 seconds, and then hand Margaret exactly what she needed. A story where I was the unstable one who blew up a family vacation. Security walked the four of us, 5 if you counted the guest who'd stopped to watch, who peeled off the second an actual employee showed up, down to a small office behind the front desk that smelled like carpet cleaner and stale coffee. A woman named Patricia, according to her name tag, asked each of us in turn to state our name and whether we were a registered guest on the reservation. When it was my turn, she pulled up the account on her monitor, without me even giving her the confirmation number. Ma'am, you're listed as the primary account holder and the paying guest, she said, glancing between the screen and me like she was double-checking her own eyes. The reservation shows 4 guests total. You, a Mark Whitfield, a Margaret Whitfield, and a Robert Whitfield. She paused. There's no Elena listed anywhere on this booking. She's a friend of the family, Margaret said quickly, before I could answer. She was just visiting the room. Patricia's expression didn't change, but she made a note on a small pad next to her keyboard, and something about the specific, unhurried way she wrote it down told me hotel staff had seen this particular flavor of explanation before. She told us the hotel had no interest in the personal dispute, only in confirming who was authorized to be on the reservation, and that as the primary guest, I retained the right to modify or cancel it. Then she slid a printed copy of the guest list across the desk toward me, unprompted, for your records. I folded it into my back pocket next to the boarding pass. It was the first piece of paper I'd thought to save in this entire disaster, and it wouldn't be the last. Mark tried to talk to me in the hallway afterward. I don't remember most of what he said. Something about how it wasn't supposed to happen like this, how his mother had told him I'd already agreed to sit this trip out to give everyone space. I remember asking him calmly whether he'd ever once heard me agree to that, and watching him not answer. I put the phone away. I went back to my own hotel room, a different room, on a different floor, booked and paid for on a card that was, at least for now, still only mine, and I didn't sleep. I lay there running the timeline over and over, the tea, the message, the flight, the door, the guest list folded in my pocket. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I stopped trying to make sense of it emotionally and started making a list instead, because that's the only thing that had ever made me feel steady. Documents, dates, names. I filled 4 pages of the hotel notepad before the sun came up. I flew home 2 days early. Mark stayed. I don't fully know what conversation happened in that suite after I left, and for a long time I told myself I didn't want to know. Priya picked me up from the airport and handed me a legal pad before I'd even put my seatbelt on. She's a paralegal at a family law firm downtown, and she'd spent the 2 days I was in Florida doing something I hadn't thought to do yet. She'd logged into the banking app on my laptop with my permission texted from the hotel lobby at 2 a.m. and pulled 6 months of our joint checking account activity into a spreadsheet. I told myself it was probably nothing, she said, which is exactly exactly the sentence I'd used about the tea, about the bonding time, about all of it. Then I looked at the transfers. She turned her own phone around to show me the spreadsheet, rows of dates and amounts highlighted in yellow. Over the past 4 months, $1,400 had moved out of our joint account in increments small enough that I'd never flagged them individually. $600 in March, $900 in April, $475 twice in May, always described in the memo line as things like home repair, mom's medical, or once, oddly specific, dad's roof. Final. I recognized none of the recipient account numbers, a string of digits that meant nothing to me. Priya recognized the shape of it immediately, because her firm had handled a similar pattern for another client 2 years earlier, a case where an adult son had been quietly draining his aging mother's savings the same way. This is a structuring pattern, she said, staying under the threshold that would trigger an automatic bank flag for suspicious activity. Most banks review anything over $1,000 more closely, so nothing here ever crosses that line on its own. Someone's been moving your money out slowly enough that you wouldn't notice until it was gone, and specific enough in the memo lines that if you ever did notice, it would look boring instead of alarming. My hands started shaking before my brain finished the sentence. I sat in the passenger seat of my sister's Honda Accord in the airport parking garage, engine still running, and felt the floor of my own marriage disappear a second time in 3 days. First the bed, now the bank account. There's a roof, I said stupidly, because it was the only detail small enough to hold on to. We don't have a roof problem. I would know if we had a roof problem. That's kind of my point, Priya said. I need to talk to someone who actually does this for a living, I said. Not guess, no. Priya's firm referred me to Denise Alvarez, a family law attorney with 19 years of practice, most of it in contested divorce and asset tracing cases. Her office was small and smelled like burnt coffee, and she listened to the whole thing, the tea, the ticket, the suite, the transfers, without interrupting once, which I appreciated more than I expected to. First, she said when I finished, I want to be direct with you. What you're describing with the tea is potentially criminal, not just a marital betrayal. Administering a substance to someone without consent, especially one with a documented adverse reaction on file, can constitute battery or worse depending on your state's statute. That's a conversation for a criminal attorney or the police, and I'll give you a referral. What I handle is everything downstream of that. The marriage, the money, the fraud. Fraud, I repeated. Every reservation on that trip was booked in your name, on your card, as the primary account holder, Denise said. If your husband and his mother knowingly misrepresented your marital status to a third party, this, Elena, to obtain lodging and benefits under your reservation while excluding you from a trip you paid for, that's worth documenting, even if it's not the centerpiece of your case. The centerpiece is going to be the $14,300. She pulled a legal pad toward her, the same brand Priya used. Like all the women helping me had coordinated stationery without meaning to. I want you to do 3 things before we talk again. Freeze that joint account, or at minimum change the alerts so every transaction texts you in real time. Get your medical records pulled. The Valerian note, if it's in your chart, needs to be preserved exactly as written. And I want a forensic accountant to trace where that $14,300 actually went, because home repair in a memo line means nothing to a judge. I called the bank that same afternoon. This should have been simple. It wasn't. The account was joint, which meant Mark had every legal right to move money without my permission, and the representative on the phone, polite, apologetic, utterly unable to help, explained that they couldn't freeze it based on my say-so alone without a court order, since his name was on it too. So he can keep taking money out and there's nothing I can do today? Not without documentation, she said. I'm sorry. I hung up and sat with that for exactly 4 minutes before I called Denise back. That's expected, she said when I told her. It's frustrating, but it's expected. Here's what we do instead. We move fast on the emergency filing, and in the meantime, you open a new account in your name only and redirect your own paycheck there immediately. You can't stop him from draining what's left in the joint account today. You can stop feeding it. I did that within the hour. It felt like patching one hole in a boat that had 3 others I couldn't see yet, but it was something. Denise connected me with Raymond Oduya, a certified forensic accountant she'd worked with on 11 prior cases, who specialized in exactly this kind of slow bleed transfer pattern. I sent him 3 months of statements. He called me 2 days later. This isn't sloppy, he said, without preamble. Sloppy people move round numbers on random dates. This is structured. Amounts varied intentionally, spaced out to avoid any single transaction that would trigger a bank's automatic reporting threshold. Whoever did this either has some financial literacy or is being coached by someone who does. Could you trace where it actually went? 6 of the transfers went to an account belonging to a Margaret Whitfield, he said. The remainder went to a home improvement contractor who, according to public records, did a kitchen renovation on a property owned by Mark's parents in Ohio. Not your house, theirs. I sat with the phone against my ear in my kitchen, the kitchen I'd apparently helped renovate for people who'd told a stranger I was long gone, and didn't say anything for a while. I can put together a formal report with transaction-level detail, Raymond said. Dates, amounts, destination accounts, cross-referenced with the contractor's permit filings. Judges respond to that kind of documentation a lot better than they respond to a story, no offense. None taken, I said. I'm starting to prefer documentation to stories myself. While Raymond built his report, I made the mistake of calling Mark's older sister, Diane, hoping for one honest conversation in this family. I told myself it would go badly. I told myself that right up until it didn't. Diane had had been estranged from their mother for 6 years over something she'd never fully explained to Mark or me. When I told her what happened, the tea, the ticket, the transfers, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said something that reorganized my entire understanding of the last 4 months. She did something almost identical with my ex-husband's inheritance, Diane said, years ago. Small transfers, a fake home repair story, a trip where I got accidentally left behind while she took him and his side of the family somewhere. I didn't have the money or the energy to fight it the way you're fighting it. That's part of why I stopped speaking to her. My stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with betrayal and everything to do with recognition. This wasn't a lapse. This wasn't Margaret making one bad decision under pressure. This was a pattern with a track record, and Mark had grown up close enough to it to know exactly how it worked and had let it happen to me anyway. Would you be willing to put that in writing? I asked, not to hurt her, to show a court this isn't isolated. Diane exhaled slowly. Yeah, she said. I would. I probably should have the first time. Denise brought in someone I hadn't expected to need, a licensed private investigator named Tom Ruiz, 19 years in the field, most recently focused on financial misconduct within family disputes. His job wasn't to dig up anything dramatic. It was to corroborate. Tom interviewed Elena, who agreed to a recorded statement confirming exactly what Margaret had told her about our marriage being over. He obtained hotel records confirming the room's primary reservation holder, me, and cross-referenced the dates against Diane's account of the earlier incident with her ex-husband, pulling divorce filing records from that case that were a matter of public record. He compiled it all into a single report alongside Raymond's financial documentation. I want to be clear about something, Tom told me when he handed it over. None of this proves intent to drug you, specifically. That's outside what a financial investigator or PI can establish. That's a criminal matter for police and a toxicology conversation, if you have any of that tea left, or if your reaction was documented anywhere medically at the time. What I can tell you, with confidence, is that the financial pattern and the misrepresentation to Elena are consistent, corroborated, and documented well enough to hold up. I hadn't kept the mug. I hadn't thought at 11 at night with a suitcase to finish packing to preserve evidence of a betrayal I didn't know was happening yet. But my doctor's office, when I called, still had the original note about the Valerian reaction from years earlier, time-stamped and unambiguous. It wasn't proof of that specific night. It was proof I'd told Mark, in writing, that this substance was dangerous for me, which made "Mom said it would just help you sleep" a very different sentence in a legal document than it had sounded in a hotel hallway. Everything came to a head on a Thursday, 6 weeks after the trip. Raymond finished his report. Tom finished his. Denise called me at 4:15 in the afternoon with a voice I hadn't heard from her before. Fast, clipped, all business. Mark filed a withdrawal request on a CD this morning, she said. $22,000, joint account, matures in 90 days normally, but he's requesting early withdrawal with an early termination penalty, which tells me he's trying to liquidate before we can get an emergency order in front of a judge. If that clears, the money's gone in a way that's much harder to claw back. How long do I have? The bank has a standard 3-day hold on early CD liquidations for verification. That's already ticking. If we don't get an emergency financial restraining order filed and served before that hold lifts, he can move the funds anywhere, and Raymond's beautiful paper trail becomes a lot less useful for getting it back, even if it's great for proving what happened. 3 days. I remember standing in my kitchen holding my phone with both hands like it might try to leave. What do you need from me right now? I need you in my office in 90 minutes with your ID and every document Raymond and Tom sent you, Denise said. We're filing an emergency motion today. Judges don't love being rushed, but a documented structuring pattern plus an active liquidation attempt is exactly the kind of thing that gets an emergency hearing instead of a 6-week wait. I don't remember the drive to her office. I remember my hands shaking on the steering wheel at a red light and thinking, absurdly, of the mug of chamomile tea, how something that small had led to a legal filing with the words emergency and restraining in the title. I remember sitting in Denise's office watching her draft language I didn't fully understand. Phrases like dissipation of marital assets and temporary restraining order pending full hearing, and thinking that somewhere in Florida, Mark was probably telling himself this would all blow over, the way he'd told himself the tea was just being thoughtful. The filing went in at 6:40 that evening, 40 minutes before the courthouse closed the intake window for same-day emergency motions. The judge granted a temporary restraining order on the joint accounts the next morning, freezing the CD before the withdrawal could clear. Mark was served that afternoon, and according to Denise, his attorney's first move was to try to characterize the whole thing as a misunderstanding between an overprotective mother and an unstressed son. That framing lasted exactly as long as it took Denise to submit Raymond's structuring report, Tom's corroborated statements from Elena and Diane's written account of the earlier, nearly identical pattern from years before. At the full hearing 5 weeks later, the judge didn't rule on the criminal question of the tea. That had, by then, become a separate matter with the local police, who'd opened an inquiry based on my statement and the medical documentation, though Denise was careful to tell me those cases move slowly and don't always result in charges. But on the financial side, the judge found the pattern of transfers sufficiently documented to constitute dissipation of marital assets, and ordered the remaining funds frozen pending the divorce settlement, with the $14,300 already transferred to be accounted for and offset against Mark's share of our marital property. property. Margaret wasn't a party to the divorce, but she didn't walk away clean. Once Diane's statement and Raymond's account trail became part of a filed court record, they were also, technically, public record. And in a family as image-conscious as Mark's, that mattered more than any dollar amount. Diane told me later that 2 of Margaret's siblings had read the filing and stopped returning her calls. Elena, for her part, filed her own small claims action against Margaret for the resort costs she'd been talked into covering, as her share of a trip she now understood had been fraudulently arranged around a marriage that was very much not over. Mark didn't fight the divorce. I think in the end, he understood there wasn't much left to fight for. The finalized settlement gave me the marital home, awarded me the offset for the dissipated funds, and closed a 6-year chapter with considerably less drama than the 6 weeks that had preceded it. It's been 8 months. I still have the doctor's note about the valerian, framed, not out of sentiment, but because Denise told me to keep the original somewhere safe, and I never got around to putting it anywhere else. I sold the house eventually. Too many color-coded packing lists had happened inside those walls, and moved into a smaller place near Priya, who still keeps a legal pad in her car for reasons that have nothing to do with her job anymore. Diane and I still talk. She told me, a few months ago, that she'd finally said everything to her mother she'd been holding back for 6 years, and that it felt less like revenge and more like exhaling. I think about the button a lot, the one I hovered over in that hallway, the one that would have canceled every reservation on the spot and felt incredible for about 4 seconds. I never pressed it. I documented instead, and it took 6 weeks longer, and it worked in a way that 4 seconds of satisfaction never would have. I did eventually cancel that reservation, for the record, just not with my thumb in a hallway in front of an audience. I did it through my attorney in writing with an itemized invoice attached.